Good afternoon and welcome to Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. February is National Black History Month in the United States. This annual celebration notes the achievements by African Americans and recognizes their central role in U.S. history. Since 1976, every U.S. president has officially designated the month of February as Black History Month. Today we've got an exclusive premiere of a short film that was made by Across the Fence's own Ben Willis and a group of students. Speak Loud, the Story of Mabel Byrd has been selected for the Black History Film Festival in Washington, D.C., where it will be screened later this month at the historic Lincoln Theater. Ben joins us. Always great to see you. And our viewers might be used to seeing you reporting from the field, but it may be a surprise to learn that you're an award-winning educator. In 2016, the National Association of Secretaries of State gave you an award for innovative approaches to civic education through visual storytelling. And then more recently, you were honored for your work as a teacher and a community builder during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're here with an award winner.
Yep, thanks for having me on, Julie.
Absolutely. What's the story behind this film?
Yeah, so this film was created for an event that I helped get going called the Troutbeck Symposium. It was actually the brainchild of a colleague of mine, a history teacher from Connecticut named Ronan McCrisky. And what we do is we encourage students to go out into their communities and find local history stories that really haven't been told or have been undertold or just told very poorly. And students go out, they do this research, and then what we ask them to do is create some type of visual or performing art pieces around this. So today we've got a documentary film, which is what many students choose to do, and is my expertise. But we also have students who go out and they'll write songs, or they will create paintings or sculptures, or do other types of performing arts or mixed media projects.
And art is very central to this, as you've just described, so why not do something like a paper instead?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that reading, writing, the sort of traditional academic pursuits can not always work very well for all students, right? And so the arts is a way that kind of opens this up to more students, and it helps them find their voice, it helps them build confidence. And I also think that for telling history stories, history is about storytelling, and so are the arts. So it kind of makes a lot of sense to do it this way.
And how many students worked with you on the project?
So this project, we had 3 students working on it, but some of my projects I've worked on, I've had a whole classroom of students. Sometimes it's 1 or 2 students. So it really depends. I try and adapt it for the particular school I'm working with.
And without further ado, let's have a look at Speak Loud, the Story of Mabel Byrd.
On February 21st, 1934, an unconscious woman was dragged out of the Capitol building by police. Someone at the Senate restaurant had reported a disturbance at 11 a.m. It was a surprising call for the Capitol Police to receive, a request to remove a small, unassuming woman who had refused to leave after she was denied a table. This type of protest was unusual in the hallowed halls of the U.S. Senate. Perhaps she had shouted out that she had worked for the president. Perhaps she had shouted something about her time testifying on Capitol Hill. Perhaps she had simply demanded to be treated the same as anyone else who had arrived at the restaurant that day. As bystanders looked on in shock, this woman was dragged from the Capitol. They did not know that they were possibly seeing the birth of a new tactic in the civil rights movement. There would be various accounts over what exactly happened that day. But this small woman, standing up for herself on a cold winter morning in 1934, would grab national headlines. And her act of defiance that day would inspire others to follow in her footsteps with a little-used form of protest in America: the sit-in. W.E.B. Du Bois confidently approached the podium at Oregon University. Students crowded the auditorium, hoping to hear the editor of the NAACP's Crisis magazine speak. Among the audience, a young woman, an excited, passionate, and ambitious Mabel Byrd, sitting on the edge of her seat. However, what the hordes of excited students didn't realize is that a few weeks prior, it was Mabel who had sent a letter to Du Bois, inviting him to speak. Her letters and enthusiasm must have impressed the civil rights activist, or perhaps it was because the young student had already made history as the first African American enrolled at the University of Oregon. After some correspondence, Du Bois agreed to travel across the country from New York City all the way to the Pacific Northwest to fulfill her request for him to provide some inspiring words to Oregon University. Not 1 year later, Mabel was on her way to New York City to work with Du Bois at the NAACP Crisis Magazine in Harlem. Mabel's time in New York City was very important to her early career. She would work for W.E.B. Du Bois in his magazine The Crisis, arguably the most influential magazine in black media at the time, as well as working with the Young Women's Christian Association in New York. She accomplished many impressive tasks, such as creating an alumni chapter for the University of Oregon. She earned a notable reputation. She was well known enough that by the time she earned a scholarship to study settlement housing in England, 200 people attended her going-away party on Easter Sunday. There were many noteworthy guests. Langston Hughes read poetry. Aaron Douglas and W.E.B. Du Bois were in attendance. It was an incredible event and a tribute to her successes and her time in Harlem. She had been there for just 3 years. Like most of her endeavors, Mabel's time abroad was a great success. She found a job with the International Labor Organization, connected to the League of Nations, and spoke at the 6th Congress of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. After working overseas, Mabel returned to the USA to work for the Roosevelt administration. She was outspoken about the racial disparity in the New Deal and how it was being implemented. She was encouraged to leave her post after just a few months on the job. In 1933, she received a request from Du Bois to join him at a conference in upstate New York. When Mabel arrived, she must have been stunned by those in attendance. The biggest names in civil rights at the time were all there. It is hard to believe that the gathering of activists did not influence Mabel's decisions in Washington, D.C. the following year. Mabel had arrived at the Capitol for hearings on the Costigan-Wagner anti-lynching bill, an issue very important to her and Dr. Du Bois. It is not known if Mabel had intended what would come next. She arrived at the Senate restaurant with 3 other people. However, the waitress promptly refused to seat her, stating, "If that woman is colored, she can't eat in here." It should come as no surprise that Mabel immediately protested this treatment, and in doing so, inspired a wave of sit-ins and protests aimed at ending segregation within the U.S. Capitol building. The Atlanta Daily World reported that Byrd had been dragged unconscious through the corridor and down the stairs to the police headquarters within the Capitol before being placed in a doctor's care. What followed may be considered to be gaslighting perpetrated by the most powerful man in Washington. Senator Royal S. Copeland, chair of the Senate Rules Committee, stated that Byrd's party was not denied service due to a race, but rather because the establishment was full. Copeland then, thinking he had found the ideal solution, ordered the restaurant to reserve a table specifically for African Americans. The sergeant at arms even weighed in, this time blaming the waitress who had refused to seat Mabel. Despite these statements, there had in fact been a policy in place since 1917 to bar people of color from sitting in the restaurant, but it was seldom enforced. Until Senator Lindsey Warren invited a friend, Patrick Henry Johnson, to manage the restaurant, he set about implementing the policy. Under the spotlight of the media, In the following days, people of color were allowed to eat at the Senate restaurant, but over time, the staff began to discourage, then make excuses, then slowly once again outright bar those who were not white from entering. Others followed in Mabel's footsteps. There were larger sit-ins and brief periods where the rules were not as sternly enforced. Finally, in the 1950s, a new era of civil rights began. A reverend from the South was encouraging all manner of sit-ins. It was around this time, as folks protested at various Washington establishments, that the Jim Crow rules at the Capitol building were quietly ushered out the door, as if they had never happened, and no one would ever need to face responsibility for what they had done.
What an inspiring woman. So is there anything you really want viewers to take away from this?
Yeah, I think that what's really interesting about Mabel Byrd's life is that the events you see in the film, right, at the Capitol building, that occurs in 1934. And the civil rights movement, as we usually learn about it in school, starts 20 years later, right? The Montgomery bus boycott, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King. So 20 years is a really long time to wait. And I think the lesson there is that standing up to injustice can be frustrating because it's tough, but change might not come immediately. It might not come in 2 years or 4 years or 20 years or even in a lifetime. And what we see in the movie is at the end, Mabel Byrd, instead of wanting money to go towards a memorial service for her, she asked that when she dies, that the money goes towards a scholarship fund. And I think the lesson there is that you keep fighting for what's right for your whole life, and then at the end, you pass the torch on to the next generation.
Absolutely, and if you're a teacher or an educator who's interested in getting involved with the Troutbeck program, how could they do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we try and really be very inclusive and equitable in how we do this, so anyone's welcome to participate. But also, this was created by a very loose organization of teachers, right? And so we kind of are hoping that other teachers will steal this idea and run with it and do their own thing. But also, I'm always happy to help out, support, give any wisdom I've learned from the years of doing this to any teacher who wants to do something similar.
Sure, absolutely. They can kind of adopt their own program.
Exactly.
All right, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
And for more information about the Troutbeck Symposium and how you can get involved, email Ben Willis at the address on your screen. And that closes the gate on another program. I want to thank the crew here at WCAX for all their hard work. I'm Jolie Whitney. This is Across the Fence. Have a good one.